Hey guys, tonight we step into a world that isn't all gleaming marble and golden laurel crowns, but one of smoky hearths, stiff sandals, and a whole lot of uncomfortable sleeping mats. You're standing in Sparta at dusk, the torchlight flickering across stone walls that feel a little too cold for comfort. You probably won't survive this, unless you really love running barefoot over thorny fields while grown men yell at you for breathing wrong. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen. I'm always curious. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a Spartan training camp called the agōgē, where kids are scooped up at the age of 7 and tossed into something less like school and more like a lifelong obstacle course. Imagine your childhood, but replace Saturday morning cartoons with wrestling practice in the dirt and a breakfast of whatever you could steal without getting caught. Spartan boys, and sometimes even girls, though with their own twist, are stripped of soft clothing, handed one single cloak per year, and told to tough it out. No pillows, no shoes in winter. You're lying on a bed of reeds tonight, scratching your back against the stiff stalks, while your roommates snore like baby wild boars. The flicker of firelight barely reaches the edges of the barracks. Every corner feels drafty. Every plank of wood groans when someone shifts. Your ears ring with the echo of instructors chanting orders, voices harsh enough to slice through the sleepy air. Historians still argue whether Spartan kids truly loved the discipline or just faked enthusiasm to avoid a beating. You're probably leaning toward the second option as you curl tighter against the cold. Fact, the agōgē was less about reading and more about memorization. Entire poems, whole songs, drilled into you until you could recite them while running laps. And here's the kicker. Spartans didn't even write much down. Your brain was the library. Whether you liked it or not, quirky tidbit, some kids were encouraged to steal food, but if you got caught, the punishment was worse than the hunger. You'd think this taught cunning, but really it just taught a lifelong poker face and how to chew very, very quietly. The air smells like sweat, leather, and a faint tang of iron from all the weapons stacked nearby. You hear the scrape of a whetstone as older boys polish their spears, a lullaby of steel against stone. Outside, night insects hum, filling the gaps between laughter and the occasional groan from someone practicing push-ups long past bedtime. Your toes are numb, but you're too proud or too terrified to complain. Remember when your mom used to tuck you in and bring warm milk? Well, here a Spartan mother just pats you on the shoulder and says, "Don't come home unless you're tougher tomorrow." You wonder if she's serious. Spoiler, she is. Spartan moms are basically life coaches who skipped the hugs and went straight for motivational threats. Now your stomach growls, a hollow echo against the barracks walls. You think of the barley bread ration you had earlier. It was hard enough to double as a weapon, and that thin soup of onions that tasted like, well, more hot water than an onion. Your mouth waters as you imagine something soft and sweet, but nope, not here. Yea, hunger is part of the training, a gnawing reminder that you're alive and therefore expected to fight another day. There's one moment of odd comfort. The sound of everyone breathing in sync. Dozens of kids who've all been shoved into the same strict rhythm. You realize you're part of something bigger, though it feels less like belonging and more like being welded into a human shield. But as your eyes get heavier, you can't help but smirk at the thought. If ancient travel blogs existed, the Spartan youth program would definitely get a 1-star review. A boy beside you nudges your arm and whispers a half-joke about sneaking out to steal cheese from the temple. You both stifle a laugh, careful not to alert the overseer prowling the shadows. That little flicker of rebellion keeps your eyelids from fully closing. The silence stretches on, heavy as bronze armor, until the snores win and the darkness swallows the camp whole. And so you drift, wrapped not in blankets, but in the knowledge that tomorrow will be louder, colder, and definitely sweatier. The next morning, you shuffle in line toward the Spartan mess hall, which looks more like a barn than any dining room you've known. The smell hits you before you even see the bowls, an earthy, metallic tang that promises disappointment. Today's menu, black broth. Imagine pig's blood simmered with vinegar and a few scraps of meat tossed in for flavor. Then imagine someone forgot the flavor part. You cradle the bowl in your hands, the steam rising in weak wisps, and you wonder who first decided, yes, this will be the pride of Sparta. You sip. It tastes like licking a rusty helmet after a rainstorm. Across from you, a fellow trainee slurps it down without flinching, eyes glassy, as if pretending its gourmet helps. Historians still argue whether the broth was genuinely adored by Spartans, or whether they just leaned into the idea of suffering as a brand. Either way, outsiders hated it. There's an old story of a visiting Sybarite, famous for living in luxury, who gagged at the first mouthful and declared, "Now I know why Spartans are so fearless in battle. Death is preferable to this." Your stomach churns, but it's either drink or starve. Bread on the side? Yes, but don't get too excited. The loaf is dense enough to qualify as building material. You snap off a corner, nearly chipping a tooth, and chew slowly, the grains crunching like gravel. A quirky tidbit. Spartans sometimes use leftover broth as a cold remedy. Imagine being sick, then being handed a cup of pig's blood soup and told it would help. You'd probably decide to get better on sheer willpower alone. Around you, the mess hall echoes with wooden spoons, clinking and low murmurs of conversation. No laughter. Spartans considered mealtime serious business. You're meant to eat in silence, showing discipline even in chewing. Someone clears their throat too loudly and gets a sharp look from the overseer. You hunch closer to your bowl, blending in, letting the sour, salty broth slide down your throat while your taste buds beg for mercy. As the meal drags on, your senses dull. The dim firelight paints shadows on the wooden beams overhead, turning smoke into lazy ribbons that drift toward the rafters. The rhythm of spoons and swallowing becomes hypnotic, almost like a drum beat. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the broth's aftertaste won't let you fully relax. You think of other Greek cities, Athens with its olives, Corinth with its wines, and you sigh. Somewhere out there, people are feasting on honey cakes and figs, and here you are, gnawing bread bricks and pretending blood stew is edible. You can't decide if it's tragic or just funny in a bad camping trip kind of way. But there's one silver lining. By enduring this, you know you're part of a community that values toughness above everything. Food isn't about joy here. It's about proving you can swallow misery and ask for seconds. And weirdly, that realization warms you more than the broth ever could. You scrape the bottom of your bowl, the vinegar tang clinging stubbornly to your tongue. The hall empties slowly, sandals scuffing across the floor, cloaks brushing against one another as everyone files out into the daylight. The meal leaves you both heavier and hungrier. A paradox the Spartans probably would have called character building. As you step outside, the crisp morning air fills your lungs, cleansing the metallic aftertaste. The sun edges over the hills, lighting up fields where other trainees jog in formation. Your body groans at the thought of drills on such a stomach, but you tighten your cloak and shuffle forward, resigned. After all, in Sparta, you don't eat for pleasure. You eat for endurance. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of honey cakes tonight as a tiny rebellion. You march out from the mess hall with that broth still clinging to your breath, but there's no time to complain. The day stretches ahead like a long corridor of drills and bruises, and in the back of your mind, you hear the voices of Spartan mothers, sharp, proud, and utterly terrifying. Come back with your shield, or on it. That's the bedtime story you grew up with. Sweet dreams, kiddo. You picture it. A mother handing her son the heavy round shield, polished bronze gleaming, wood creaking under its weight. She doesn't smile, doesn't say, "Be careful." She just reminds him that returning alive without the shield is basically the worst outcome, because it means you dropped it while running away. And running from battle, that's worse than death. You hold the shield now, its rim biting into your palm, and the pressure feels heavier than the metal itself. The saying echoes all across Sparta, whispered into ears at farewells, stitched into the very rhythm of the city. Historians still argue whether mothers really said it that often, or if later storytellers exaggerated for drama. Either way, the line stuck like dried wine on stone, and now you can't escape it. Even as you stand in training fields, that grim motto hangs over you like the mountain mist. The shield itself isn't small. Forget Hollywood props, this thing is a circular wall, about 3 feet wide, strapped to your arm until the leather chafes raw. You're not carrying it for you, you're carrying it for the man next to you, because in phalanx formation, shields overlap, building a human tank. Lose yours, and you doom the whole line. Quirky tidbit. Some Spartans supposedly decorated the inside of their shields with tiny carvings or charms, little good luck tokens hidden where no one else could see. A doodle of a horse, a goddess etched in miniature. Even warriors liked secret stickers, apparently. The field around you rings with clashing wood as trainees slam their shields together, practicing the wall. You push into formation, shoulder to shoulder, the weight pressing into your ribs. The sound is deafening, boots stamping, instructors shouting, bronze edges grinding. Your muscles shake, but the pressure of bodies beside you holds you up. Somewhere behind, an overseer bellows, "Tighter!" and the line compresses until you feel more like a sardine than a soldier. You remember the mothers again, their faces lined from years of waiting, their words colder than the broth you forced down earlier. Did they believe it deep down, or did they say it because everyone else did? That's the part scholars still wonder about. Were Spartan women truly that uncompromising? Or was it part theatre, part propaganda to make sure nobody wavered? Either way, the result is the same. You grow up with a lullaby that sounds more like a dare. As practice drags on, sweat slicks your back. Seeping into the rough wool cloak, the sun climbs. Hot enough to sting your skin, but the drills don't stop. Your shield arm aches, trembling, but you keep holding it. Let it drop, and you'll feel the sting of the overseer's rod across your shoulders. The line sways forward, then back, mimicking a battle push. You almost laugh at the absurdity. Here you are, still a kid, pretending to be part of an unstoppable war machine while your stomach begs for figs and cheese. The clang of training weapons mixes with the rhythm of sandals slapping the dust. The whole camp smells like iron filings and damp wool, with undertones of sweat so thick you could bottle it as eau de Spartan. Someone sneezes, the sound swallowed by grunts and shouting. The taste of vinegar still haunts your tongue, but maybe that's just permanent now. Night creeps in again, shadows lengthening across the field. You finally lower the shield, arm half numb, shoulders burning. The day dissolves into dusk, and you realize the motto wasn't just words. It's a whole way of breathing, eating, and collapsing into sleep. You carry the shield not because you want to, but because everyone's eyes demand it. And when you finally lie back on your bed of reeds, the phrase follows you into your dreams, with it or on it. No middle ground. The camp quiets, but your mind drifts elsewhere. Not to the clang of shields this time, but to stories whispered by firelight. You slip into the realm of myths, expecting glory and monsters, only to land somewhere far less cinematic. Tonight you tag along with Heracles, the supposed hero of heroes. And what's he doing? Not wrestling lions or hurling boulders. Nope, he's tackling the parts of the myth that poets conveniently edited out. The laundry, the mud, and the very boring bits in between. You follow him down to a riverbank, where he's knee-deep in cold water, scrubbing a tunic that looks like it hasn't seen soap in years. His muscles glisten, sure, but instead of glory, you smell damp wool and mildew. He mutters under his breath, cursing grass stains from his last heroic romp. The mighty Heracles, reduced to rubbing goat fat into linen. Historians still argue whether Greek heroes were meant to be everyday role models or just cautionary tales, and watching him flail with soap makes you wonder which. Fact: ancient Greeks did actually use things like lye or ash to clean clothes, and sometimes urine. Yes, actual urine. It was cheap, it worked, and it definitely made wash day memorable. You wrinkle your nose at the sharp ammonia tang as Heracles dunks another tunic. Quirky tidbit: some myths say Heracles once cleaned himself by scraping oil and sweat off with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. Imagine a beefy demigod, not smashing monsters, but scraping armpits. Not exactly the bedtime legend kids dream of. As he wrings out a cloak, you notice the river's current dragging suds downstream, carrying heroic grime into villages where people will drink that water later. Ancient life really didn't come with a filter button. Your bare feet squish in mud, reeds brushing your calves, while frogs croak in rhythm. The whole scene feels less like epic poetry and more like an awkward camping trip where someone forgot to pack enough towels. Heracles pauses to glare at a pile of dirty sandals, each caked with more muck than leather. He sighs like a weary parent facing a mountain of dishes, and you realize, for every labor that got immortalized, the hydra, the stables, the golden apples, there were probably 50 tiny, boring chores that never made the cut. Killing a lion is flashy, but repairing lion-hide tunics, not so much. You shuffle closer, watching him hang damp tunics on a line strung between two crooked trees. The fabric drips, each drop plopping into the dirt with exaggerated patience. A breeze ruffles the cloth, making them sway like tired ghosts. You imagine Greek bards skipping this part of the story entirely, strumming their lyres with a wink. And then Heracles did other things not worth mentioning. Convenient, huh? Still, there's something oddly soothing about the rhythm. Swish, scrub, ring. The repetitive motions lull you, turning heroics into a lullaby of soap and water. You yawn, leaning back against a tree, the bark rough against your cloak. The stars poke through above, indifferent to the sight of a demigod, elbow deep in laundry. And as you drift, you realize heroes weren't all fire and thunder. They lived messy, ordinary days too. Their glory had mud under its fingernails, just like yours. The night drifts onward, and soon you find yourself climbing a winding path toward Delphi, where the air smells faintly of smoke and pine resin. You expect the oracle to be all grand revelations and lightning bolts, but instead it feels like waiting at the world's slowest customer service desk. You settle onto a stone bench, knees stiff from the climb, and join a crowd of travelers who look equally impatient. Some cradle offerings of bread or figs. Others just stare at the marble columns, tapping their sandals like commuters at a bus stop. Inside the temple, smoke coils from a crack in the floor, where the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, breathes in fumes. Was it volcanic gas? Hallucinogenic herbs? Historians still argue whether the oracle's visions came from geology or just good theater. Either way, you're about to wait hours for a cryptic answer that might be less helpful than a fortune cookie. Finally, the heavy doors creak open. You shuffle forward, feet echoing on worn marble, and the heat inside envelops you like a wool cloak. The chamber glows with lamplight, shadows flickering across faded frescoes of gods looking smug. At the center, the Pythia rocks gently on her tripod, eyes half closed, muttering sounds that barely qualify as words. You lean closer, straining to catch meaning. Go forth, when the goat dances, she whispers. Then silence. That's it. No follow-up, no handy map. Just a riddle that could mean anything from attack next spring to wait until your neighbor throws a weird party. The priests scribble notes, nodding solemnly as if they've just heard the secret of the universe. You suppress a laugh because honestly it feels like ancient improv theater. Fact, city-states all over Greece sent envoys here before wars or major decisions. They truly believed Apollo spoke through this mumbling smoky haze. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts say goats were indeed part of the ritual. If one shivered after being splashed with cold water, it meant the day was good for prophecy. Imagine hinging your military campaign on whether a goat got the chills. You sit back on the stone floor, the chill seeping into your legs, listening to the drone of hymns echoing through the chamber. The mix of incense and damp limestone makes your head spin. Around you, people nod sagely, whispering interpretations as if they alone cracked the code. One man insists the oracle told him to plant more olives. Another swears it was a warning about his wife's cousin. You smirk, realizing everyone hears what they want. The Pythia sighs, her voice fading into murmurs again. Maybe she's channeling the divine. Maybe she's just tired. Either way, the room feels heavy, drowsy, and the soft flicker of flames pulls your eyelids down. You imagine all the oracles who came before her, each perched on the same tripod, muttering riddles to generations of hopeful listeners. The truth is, guidance here is more about patience than clarity. And as the smoke curls around your head, you feel yourself slipping too. Not into enlightenment, but into the slow, hazy lull of half-sleep, where riddles don't need solving, and even the gods seem drowsy. You drift further into the haze, and when the smoke clears, you're not in Delphi anymore. You're up on Olympus, peeking through the clouds at the so-called perfect gods. At first you expect majesty, Zeus thundering, Hera radiant, Apollo strumming divine chords. Instead, what you get feels less like a pantheon and more like a chaotic family reunion nobody planned properly. Zeus sits at the head, beard freshly curled, tossing thunderbolts like paperweights. He should be commanding the universe, but really, he looks like a dad who can't stop checking his texts. Every so often, he wanders off, sometimes to flirt, sometimes to vanish into another suspicious errand. Historians still argue whether Zeus's endless affairs were metaphors for natural forces, or just excuses to explain why every other hero had him as a dad. Either way, it's messy. Hera, meanwhile, glares across the table. Her patience is worn thinner than a bronze coin rubbed for luck. Every time Zeus clears his throat, she rolls her eyes so hard you're amazed Olympus doesn't shake. You can almost hear her mutter, "Another one?" Really? Quirky tidbit. Some vase paintings actually show Hera with a peacock at her side, and while it looks elegant, imagine trying to hold a serious grudge with a bird squawking next to you. Ares lounges nearby, flexing muscles for no reason, trying to look menacing while sipping wine far too loudly. Athena counters by quoting strategy like an overachieving classmate correcting your homework. Dionysus just swirls his cup, humming to himself, clearly tipsy before noon. The air smells of wine, roasted meat, and faint ozone from Zeus's leftover sparks. You'd think immortality would mean less drama, but it seems to mean eternal bickering instead. At one corner of the hall, Hermes tosses dice, grinning slyly, pockets jingling with coins borrowed from someone else. Artemis ignores it all, sharpening arrows while muttering about her hunting dogs needing more exercise. Apollo strums his lyre, badly out of tune tonight, and nobody has the heart to tell him. The sound wobbles across the hall like a mosquito trying to play jazz. You sit cross-legged on the marble floor, watching this divine soap opera unfold. Every shout echoes against golden pillars, each beam inlaid with glittering gems. But the grandeur only makes the pettiness funnier, like watching millionaires argue over who stole the last cookie. Fact: the Greeks really did project human flaws onto their gods. They lied, cheated, drank too much, and threw tantrums. It wasn't disrespect, it was relatability. The gods weren't distant perfection. They were messy mirrors of the mortals who prayed to them. The bickering drones on. Hera raises her voice. Zeus pretends not to hear, and Ares challenges Athena to yet another arm wrestle. The sound of clattering goblets and overlapping voices becomes oddly hypnotic. You let your eyes wander across frescoes on the ceiling, scenes of heroes and monsters, painted in rich colors, each frozen mid-battle. The contrast is almost comic. Silent glory overhead, squabbling immortals below. And then, between yawns, you realize Olympus isn't about awe. It's about familiarity. Even in the land of the gods, life boils down to family drama, petty squabbles, and the occasional bad lyre solo. You stretch out on the cold marble, using your cloak as a pillow, and the drone of their arguments blurs into background noise, like a celestial sitcom rerun you've heard 1,000 times. You roll over on the marble floor of Olympus, half expecting another lightning bolt to crack the sky. But instead, the scene shifts again, settling into something far less glamorous. You find yourself in Athens, trailing behind Theseus, the famous slayer of the Minotaur. You brace for adventure, picturing shadowy labyrinths, twisting corridors, and a monster with horns sharp enough to skewer a cow. Instead, Theseus is hunched over a wooden table piled high with clay tablets. Welcome to the part of the myth that never makes it into epic poetry. Paperwork. The city hums outside, vendors shouting, our donkeys braying. But here inside the store, it's the scrape of styluses on wax and the occasional cough. Theseus dips his tool into ink, scratches out names, and mutters about tax rolls. Hero by night, bureaucrat by day. Historians still argue whether real Athenian leaders spent more time fighting wars or pushing quells. But judging by the pile in front of him, your money's on the paperwork. Fact: ancient Athens really did have mountains of civic records. Citizenship lists, military rosters, tribute payments, all carved or written painstakingly by hand. Democracy may sound noble, but someone had to tally the barley shipments. And guess what? Sometimes that someone was your so-called hero. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found shards of broken pottery used for ostraca, basically ballots for voting people into exile. Imagine scribbling Theseus out on a pottery shard and tossing it into a jar like some ancient downvote. You lean against a column, watching as he rubs his temples, sighing into the parchment dust. The Minotaur fight was quick compared to this. Here, hours crawl by. The ink smells sharp, almost vinegary, mixing with the sweat of clerks bent over their desks. Every so often, a pigeon flutters through the open doorway, startling everyone into looking up, desperate for any excuse to stop writing. Theseus scratches another note, then pauses to stretch his aching hand. You glance at the tablet. It's not a heroic decree, just a list of property taxes owed by farmers in Attica. The handwriting is smudged, a streak across his wrist like war paint, but duller. He frowns, adjusts his stylus, and trudges on. You can almost hear him thinking, slaying a monster was easier than this. Your own eyelids start to droop as you listen to the monotonous scrape, scrape, scrape of styluses across wax. The sound blends with the distant hum of the agora, shoppers bargaining, sandals shuffling, and becomes strangely soothing. You let your mind wander to the labyrinth again, but even that image blurs into an endless corridor of filing shelves, each stacked with tax records instead of bones. Someone yawns loudly, and the whole row of clerks follows, a domino of drowsiness. You chuckle softly, wondering if anyone ever told bedtime stories about this part. And then the mighty Theseus balanced the books of Athens. Entering tribute payments were fully recorded. Riveting. The afternoon sun slants through the colonnade, warm on your face, turning the dust motes into drifting sparks. Theseus finally leans back, eyes bloodshot, muttering something about needing wine. And you think, maybe being a hero isn't about slaying beasts after all. Maybe it's just surviving the endless weight of ordinary duty. And with that thought, your head lolls. The paperwork lullaby carrying you towards sleep more surely than any monster could. The scene shifts again, parchment dust dissolving into darkness, and you find yourself lying flat on a hard floor in a Spartan barracks. The day's drills are over, the shouting instructors finally gone, and silence presses heavy as a wool cloak. But don't expect cozy candles flickering by your bedside. Sparta has rules about night time, too. No lamps, no flames, and no comforting glow. Just blackness so complete you can't tell if your eyes are open. You roll onto your side, the reeds beneath your cloak prickling your skin. Around you, dozens of boys shift and sigh, whispering in voices so faint they barely stir the air. The city insists silence equals discipline, so even laughter feels like a crime. You hear one kid stifle a giggle after tripping on someone's sandals in the dark. The overseer's cough cuts through instantly, and the sound dies. Here, even humor has a curfew. Fact: Spartans banned luxuries, and that included bright nights. No golden lamps, no cheerful hearths in the barracks. Just darkness to train your body and spirit to rest with discipline. Quirky tidbit: some ancient writers claim Spartans even rationed words, teaching kids to speak as little as possible. That's where laconic comes from, named for Laconoa, the region of Sparta. Imagine being told bedtime stories with only one sentence: sleep well, or else good night. Your body aches from drills, but the absence of light makes your other senses sharper. You smell sweat soaked into wool cloaks, hear the faint creak of reeds shifting under bodies, and taste the dryness of barley bread still lingering on your tongue. The air is cool, almost damp, brushing across your bare toes. You shiver and pull the cloak tighter, but it only does so much. In the silence, thoughts creep in. You remember mothers handing shields, instructors barking, broth tasting like rust. You think of other Greek cities where evenings meant lamps glowing in courtyards, neighbors chatting over figs, laughter spilling into alleys. Here, though, the night is a wall. You press your face into the reeds and wonder if tomorrow's drills will feel heavier, or if you'll simply get used to the weight. Historians still argue whether Spartans truly embraced this lifestyle, or whether most just tolerated it because no one dared to complain. Somewhere in the dark, a boy whispers about sneaking wine from a festival. His friend hushes him, but the idea lingers like the smell of smoke. You smile into your cloak, imagining the rebellion, warm cups clinking, laughter bubbling past curfew. The thought is enough to soften the edge of the silence. Your eyelids droop. The barracks hums with the rhythm of shared breathing, dozens of chests rising and falling in quiet unity. The discipline may feel harsh, but the harmony of it lulls you. The city believes this stillness is strength, and maybe they're right. Maybe discipline isn't always shouted orders. It can be the steady hush of 100 heartbeats, sinking in the dark, and so you surrender, letting the blackness swallow you whole, drifting deeper than any lamp could reach. Morning breaks with no mercy. You're shaken awake by the scrape of shields and the bark of an overseer. There's no slow stretch, no leisurely breakfast, just marching drills. Today it's the hoplite grind, and your feet already ache before you even stand. You strap on stiff bronze armor, shoulders sagging under its weight, and glance down at your sandals. Thin leather straps cut into your ankles, soles worn almost smooth. These are supposed to carry you miles. Good luck. You line up with the others, shield strapped tight, spear clutched. The overseer shouts and you march, left, right, left, across dusty ground that quickly turns to rocky paths. Every stone stabs your arch. Within minutes, you've got a blister blooming under your heel, a tiny fire with every step. Historians still argue whether Greek hoplites actually loved their sandals or preferred going barefoot. Judging by your own throbbing toes, barefoot might have been kinder. The sun climbs higher, turning bronze helmets into miniature ovens. Sweat trickles down your neck, itching under the chin strap. Your shoulders ache from the shield's weight, the edge digging into your arm with every jostle. The line moves in jerky unison, sandals slapping dust, spears bobbing like an endless forest of wood. Fact: hoplites often march dozens of miles before even reaching battle. Imagine trudging all day in armor that weighs nearly as much as a backpack stuffed with bricks. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers supposedly stuffed their sandals with wool or grass to cushion blisters. You glance down and wonder if anyone will notice if you try the same with reeds later. The sound of marching becomes hypnotic. Slap, crunch, grunt, repeat. Your blister burns hotter, and your calf muscles scream, but you keep going because the line doesn't stop. Falling behind means humiliation, maybe punishment, definitely mockery. You glance sideways at your neighbor, whose jaw is clenched so tight you can hear his teeth grind. Nobody wants to admit the same thing. The enemy isn't Persians or Thebans right now. It's friction. Dust rises in thick clouds, sticking to your sweat until you feel like a walking mud statue. The air tastes dry, metallic. Every breath rasping your throat, a crow caws from a nearby olive tree, as if mocking your misery. You wonder how many poets ever mention blisters in their battle hymns. Spoiler, none. Apparently, it ruins the heroic mood. By the time the overseer calls a halt, your feet feel twice their size, sandals dangling by frayed straps. You collapse onto a stone, yanking one off to reveal a heel rubbed raw. The sting makes you wince, but there's a grim kind of pride in it. Proof you endured. The others flop down too, silent except for heavy breathing, shields clattering as they lean them against their knees. As you sit there, sweat cooling into salty crust, you realize the march itself is part of the myth. Not the glorious clash of battle, but the endless grind to get there. And maybe that's the part nobody sings about, because it's too familiar, too human. You close your eyes, letting the burn in your muscles settle into dull throb, and you almost laugh at the thought. The true hero of Greece wasn't Achilles or Theseus. It was the soldier who managed to walk all day without losing a sandal. The overseer shouts again, snapping you back, and prone as you stand. The march isn't over. It never really is. By the time the next day rolls around, you're granted a rare reprieve from drills. Don't celebrate too much. It's not rest you're getting, it's a festival. That means crowds shouting, wine, and, well, let's just say, not enough places to pee. You shuffle with the tide of bodies into the heart of the city, where bright banners flutter overhead and smoke from roasting meat curls into the sky. The air is thick with garlic, sweat, and the sour tang of cheap wine spilled underfoot. At first, it feels electric. Musicians strum lyres, flutes trill, dancers whirl in circles that blur into dizzy patterns. You clap along, caught up in the rhythm, sandals crunching against scattered olive pits on the ground. Somewhere nearby, goats bleat nervously, destined for sacrifice. Children dart between legs, chasing each other, shrieking with joy. For a moment, you forget about blisters and broth. Fact: Greek festivals could last for days, mixing religious rituals with parades, contests, and communal feasts. Everyone from farmers to philosophers crammed into the city. Quirky tidbit: some festivals even staged competitions for Best Drunk Poet, a prize that sounds both prestigious and embarrassing. You glance toward a group of men swaying as they recite verses about wine, and the crowd roars with laughter. But here's the rub. With thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, basic needs become complicated. You feel it creeping up during the third round of dancing. A pressure in your stomach reminding you that the nearest latrine is at least 10 minutes away, if you can even reach it through the crush. Historians still argue whether festival organizers had designated spaces for relief or whether people just improvised in alleys. Judging by the smell wafting from one dark corner, you're pretty sure it's the latter. You edge toward a food stall, tempted by honey cakes glistening under the sun. The vendor slaps your hand away until you drop a coin into his jar. The cake sticks to your fingers, sweet and heavy, sugar crunching between your teeth. For a fleeting second, life feels good, but then a drunk stumbles into you, sloshing wine down your cloak, and the illusion evaporates. You sigh, licking honey from your thumb, the taste fighting with the sting of sour wine soaking into wool. The crowd swells tighter as the main procession begins. Priests march with laurel wreaths carrying statues of the gods, their faces solemn while the people around them laugh and jostle. The rhythm of drums booms against your chest, echoing through the narrow streets. You shuffle forward with everyone else, barely able to lift your arms in the crush. Your sandals slip on spilled oil, and you clutch the shoulder of the man in front of you, just to stay upright. The procession winds toward the temple steps, where smoke from burning offerings rises like a second sun. The smell of roasting goat mingles with incense, thick enough to sting your eyes. People cheer, cups clash, voices blur into one endless roar. The sound is overwhelming, a tidal wave that makes your head buzz. And yet, beneath it all, there's a lull. The repetition of drums, the endless shuffle of sandals, the sweet, sour air pressing against your lungs. It all becomes a hypnotic drone. Your mind floats, detached from your aching feet, your sticky cloak, even your pressing bladder. The festival isn't just chaos, it's rhythm. It's noise turned into a lullaby. As the sun dips, torches flare, throwing golden halos on sweaty faces. Wine keeps flowing, the music never stops. And you realize this is what being Greek means as much as any myth or battle. Shared chaos, shared endurance, and yes, shared bathrooms, or lack thereof. The festival fades behind your eyelids, replaced by the hush of a quiet courtyard. Here in Athens, instead of drums and dancing, you find yourself seated on a worn stone bench beside a group of men, deep in debate. Socrates leans forward, eyes sharp, while Plato scribbles notes with the air of someone who's convinced posterity will thank him. Tonight's topic, sleep itself. And you, already yawning, are the unwilling participant. Socrates asks, how do you know you are awake? You blink at him, trying not to slump against the wall. He smiles, waiting. For all you know, this could be another dream. Historians still argue whether Socrates' questions were meant to uncover truth or simply annoy people into staying alert. Judging by your heavy eyelids, you're leaning toward the second. Plato chimes in, talking about the soul wandering during dreams, connecting to eternal forms. His voice drones like a lullaby, layered with philosophy. Aristotle, not to be left out, insists sleep is just the body cooling itself like a fire dying down. The three of them argue, hands waving, voices overlapping. You sit there, nodding politely, trying not to drool. Fact, philosophers genuinely debated what sleep was for, long before science had answers. Some thought it was divine. Others said it was just digestion. Quirky tidbit, Aristotle claimed heavy meals made people sleepier because vapors rose from the stomach to the brain. So yes, that post-dinner nap, officially sponsored by ancient Greek science.